Hello and welcome back to the second installment of our special Pride Month retrospective celebrating the 10-year anniversary of Obergefell versus Hodges, the landmark Supreme Court case which legalized same-sex marriage and adoption rights all across the United States.
I'm Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel.
And I'm Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes.
And if you were not able to catch part one of this riveting episode, we'd recommend pausing now and listening to that one first. But let's get started.
Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know it's been a little bit since we've seen each other, but April and Jane, this is AG Kris Mayes from Arizona. And as you probably know now, we have a podcast together. And I'm so excited that you guys could join us today to talk about the 10-year anniversary of Obergefell / DeBoer v. Snyder, which is what it really should be called.
Yes,
exactly.
We've been talking, Dana and I have been talking, and she gave me the full procedural history and how it really should have been called something else. Yes. So
absolutely.
And again, no offense to him, but in our household, we refer to Jim Obergefell as an accident of history because we still believe the case should be called DeBoer v. Snyder. And I actually have a coffee mug from the Supreme Court that has all the most impactful cases, and I have it like duct taped out, and I have written DeBoer v. Snyder over Obergefell. So
that's great.
With that, you guys, I wonder if you could, just start off by telling us a little bit about that fateful day back in, I believe it was 2011, I think, when we first spoke and talked about the possibility of bringing this federal lawsuit.
I think I had located you. We had a near miss accident that probably would have left one of those. So probably Nolan, because he was in the back of the van without parents and without siblings.
And just to back up, you guys have 5 children together.
wow.
We do. Yes.
Wow.
Do you want to tell AG Mayes and our listeners a little bit about how you guys formed your family?
Oh, sure. Jane and I adopted all 5 of our children. So initially, Nolan came to us first, and here in the state of Michigan, we were not allowed to adopt the children together. So Nolan was adopted initially by Jane. Then we had Ryan come into our house and to our life. And she initially was adopted by me. And then Jacob came, and Jacob was adopted again by Jane because I was still in the process of adopting Ryan. And so we had these 3 wonderful children. That's how it all started. And then we adopted 2 more children after the 2 of them. Riley was adopted again by me. And then Kennedy came after the ruling and the decision. So she was the first and only child to be jointly adopted by both of us.
And Kris, I'm sure it's not lost on you the name of their youngest child. Named after Justice Kennedy.
Very interesting. Okay, good.
But
yes.
But again, and I, just important to know, that April and Jane, you guys have been together when you first brought Nolan in. For how many years had you guys been a couple?
Oh, that's totally you, Jane.
Let's see. 18.
Wow.
So about 18 years, and
wow.
And both April and Jane were at the time nurses in local hospitals in Detroit, and Jane was an emergency room nurse, and April was a NICU nurse, and they had both been qualified by the state to be foster care parents. So they were able to bring children into their homes as foster care parents but and jointly so, but not as adoptive parents together, which was a weird quirk of the law that we found to be incredibly horrible. But so I'm just with that background for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And so then we ended up with that fateful trip where we almost were killed in a car accident, and the realization hit that if something happened to Jane, that the boys would end up not having a parent, and I personally would have no legal right to either of the boys.
Yeah.
And then the realization that my mom, who is really the only, I shouldn't say just my mom, but my family was really the only family that the kids had known, because we lived in Michigan and Jane's family's from Indiana. And then it was the realization that Nolan, had he survived, would have been going to somebody that he didn't know really at all, because they would have the next legal right to Nolan. And that just didn't sit well with us. And we had been seeing a bunch of advertisements and information about Dana wanting to do some second parent or second documentation for wills and all of that, and child custody for gays and lesbians who found themselves in this situation. So I reached out to her and I'm like, what can we do? And her her comment was, well, we can get this all on paper, but it's only going to be worth the paper that it's written on, because the judges can make any decision that they want based on us having no legal right to our kids. And so we went from there to well, what else can we do?
And I said you can
And Dana
file a
had this
federal
case up her
lawsuit. That's what you
sleeve.
can do.
Yeah, the great plan up her sleeve.
Well, tell me about that great plan and what it was like to work with her. And did she prepare you at all, or steel you for what was ahead, what was going to be this, what must have been a roller coaster of a ride, and at the end of the day, literally making American history? Like, what was that like working with her? I'm just curious.
Be nice.
Nobody anticipated where it was
Yeah.
going to go. That's for sure. So,
Really? Okay.
yeah, no.
Did she tell you?
No.
But she just told me that she had a feeling deep down that this thing was going to go all the way. But
she didn't share that.
Well, we didn't know it was going to switch to marriage. I think that was the big thing was, we had hoped that adoption would have been the key, because that was something everybody could get behind. But when, Judge Friedman said, well, this is a gay marriage case, we were like, oh no, that's not what this is.
Yeah.
And that was the pivotal point in all this, that everybody went, oh no, what do we do now?
We were initially challenging the adoption code in Michigan that didn't allow for people who weren't married to be able to adopt jointly. And when we had cross motions for summary judgment before our district court judge in the Eastern District of Michigan, he surprised all of us by not granting either of the motions for summary, and by saying, I think you have to amend your pleadings. This is not an adoption case. This is a marriage case. You have to challenge the Michigan marriage amendment, which doesn't allow you to get married in the first place, because you wouldn't have to worry about the adoption code saying that you had to be a married couple if only you could get married. So really, you should just challenge the marriage ban. And that threw all of us for a little bit of a loop, I think. Is it a mild way to put it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Remind you,
mild.
I got in this to get married.
Right. She didn't want to marry me.
Despite 18 years.
It's like,
yeah.
So you end up in this case. It's taking these twists and these turns, and as Dana has described earlier in the podcast, you all end up really kind of getting swept into this case that ends up at the Supreme Court. I mean, I don't mean to cut to the chase or anything, but what was that like? And then Tell me what it was like when on the day that you won the case or found out that you'd won the case.
The way to get to the Supreme Court, or when we got there?
Both, especially when you got there, but both. What was both like?
I think getting there was, you know, it's going to sound crazy, but it wasn't hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was going through things, but once we really explained why we were doing what we were doing, most people understood. They realized that we weren't really out for marriage per se, but it was to protect the kids.
Yeah.
And once that was explained, people were like, okay, I can see why you're doing this.
Yeah.
But once we got to the Supreme Court, wow, what a feeling. That was crazy. Like nothing I'd ever seen. There was, there was just a sea of people, and the Michigan contingent was huge. Like what we brought was incredible.
So you were there the day of the arguments?
Yes, we were in the court the day of the arguments.
Wow. What did that feel like? What was that like?
Well, I think the scariest moment of that whole thing was how they brought into the Supreme Court. They walked us through the crowd. Like we were a train of plaintiffs parting the sea of supporters and not supporters.
And detractors.
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It was a little scary. But once we got in there, it was just a sense of awe. Like, how did we get here? I mean, like, we're just two parents who just want our kids to have safeties. How are we in the Supreme Court? It was just crazy.
Huh.
Right.
And I guess let me ask this question to all three of you. When you were listening to the oral arguments, what were your thoughts? And Dana, like, what were you thinking? How did you feel like it was going in the moment? Obviously, it ended up going well, but.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, it was so hard to tell. As you would anticipate, the questions that were asked by, Justice Kagan were semi-predictable, by, Justice Ginsburg. Also, the questions that Alito asked were not very favorable, as you would anticipate. But it was Kennedy that I couldn't tell which way he was going to go. And here we knew that the entire case was predicated on what Kennedy was going to do, most likely. I kind of hoped that maybe there was a chance with Roberts, but that was an outside chance. But it was, Kennedy that we were counting on. And the way he was, positioning his questions, I couldn't tell one way or the other. And it was the first time I thought, my God, are we going to lose this case? Because I don't know what you guys thought, but I wasn't sure from some of the questions that he asked.
I thought the questions were crazy. So, but when Mary was arguing, we said, oh, that sounds like Carol's words. That sounds like Dana talking. So we knew that there was influences from you guys, which was great. But the questions, we were just like, where are we going with this? Because to me, some of them didn't line up with what the case was all about. They were going down this rabbit hole of weird questions, but.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
I think we left just not knowing. Yeah. There was a bigger question after we left than before we went in. So
then, the big day happens. Tell me about where you were when it happened, and what went through your minds when the decision was read.
Well, every day we waited for if the case was going to be put up that day, and every day it was like, oh, and it got down to Friday, and it was either Friday or Monday when it had to come out. And we had plans every day to be in Ann Arbor. So we were at the Jim Toy Center in Ann Arbor.
Is it a community
and waiting.
Center?
Yeah, hoping it was going to come out, because there were just hundreds and hundreds of people waiting.
And then, media, press from all across the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when it
And so were
popped
all
up,
of you together? You were all
yeah,
together? Okay.
yeah, we were all on our edge of our seats waiting to see if it was going to pop up. So when it did, then yeah, everybody really leaned in and waited to hear what was going to be said. And I think it was Alana that actually read it. And then Carol was right behind her, and it was like, and then it was like quiet, and then celebration.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to be wrong because you're in real time. You're reading
Yeah.
it while you have
Right.
all these members of the press that are reading it, and nobody wants to be like, oh, that's the wrong interpretation of what they just said of this summary.
Right.
But it took us a second or two before we all jumped up and just, I mean, tears of joy
Yes.
and
Oh
celebration.
yeah. Yeah. Because I think it was like, we won. I think we won. Wait, we won. And then it was just, jumping
So
around and hugging and tears and it was
that's
And
crazy.
amazing.
my
That's
my kids were actually in a summer camp of sorts, and so my mom had taken them over there, and so somebody had the television running inside the building, and my mom said it was the cutest thing. She says all of a sudden she heard, "There's my mom."
did your kids have any sort of sense of the importance of this moment? Or yeah,
They
Um,
were too small
too
that
still
small.
at that time.
Yeah. So what was the immediate, so you have this incredible moment of euphoria over this decision. What was the immediate practical effect of the decision
They
on
had to
your
plan a
lives?
wedding. That's what happened.
Now we had
Yeah.
to go out and watch weddings and
Yeah.
Yes.
party first
Yeah,
and then
Dana was
plan a
mentioning
wedding.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. People got married like crazy. It was great.
I think we
Um,
we signed a couple of wedding certificates, I
I
believe.
think we
As
did.
witnesses. Yeah, you guys did.
Yeah.
Remember that.
But there
Yeah.
were you ultimately achieved what you set out to achieve.
Correct.
Yes.
Good. If it weren't for the group of attorneys that we had, I don't think we would have made it where we were. But yeah, we got what we wanted and what my kids needed, and that's really the bottom line.
You mentioned something, I don't know if it was you, Jane, or April, you mentioned that people, when you talk to people about the practical implications of being able to adopt and get married, they started to get it. They started to support what you were doing. Um, I guess, and I guess my question is, what's the reaction? We're coming up on 10 years at the 10-year anniversary of this decision. Has that support only grown, do you feel like, since the decision? I mean, we're obviously, one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is that not only to celebrate the decision, but also there's been rumblings that the Supreme Court might overturn it. We've had some really disturbing comments by at least one, if not more, of the Supreme Court justices about potentially overturning it. But how do people react now?
I haven't had any negatives. I don't know about you. I mean, everybody just seems to be like, oh, they're married. Okay, life goes on.
Yeah.
There's no difference. I haven't heard any negative.
I haven't either. We have not been approached by anybody. There's been really no negative media, no, not on our end anyway. But again, we
Mm-mm.
kind of faded into the background because we did our work, and
Yes, you did.
we were tired.
But
And then
but I,
some.
but I will say this. I think that April and Jane being who they are and their family being who they were and them opening themselves up the way that you
Yeah.
have to when you are the plaintiffs in a massive case as this one was, I know it took a toll on them and their family, but for us, for me working on the case, I wanted the entire world to get to know April and Jane and their kids because I knew that to know them is to love them and to understand that if you know this family, you can't otherize them. They are just like you. They are your friends. They are your neighbors. These are the people you go to when you have a sick family member and you go to the hospital, or, these are parents who are on your kids' field trip, as chaperones with you. They're exactly like you, and they just want to be treated exactly the same, no better, no, not inferior. They just want to be treated the same as all other couples and all other families. And that's what April and Jayne did, is they brought that to everybody. And they know that, there was not a camera that they shied away from, or a microphone when I had shoved it in front of them and said, make sure you're presenting your case. I can't do this, and the other lawyers can't do this the way that you can, to be advocates for yourself, to show the whole world that you're just regular people, and you're just a family that wants to be recognized as a legal family with legal rights like all other families are. And they did just such a phenomenal job in that. So yes, I'd like to think that the lawyers on the case made very good arguments and presented good evidence, but it was them as a family, I think, that ultimately led to the success of this case. Because whether we want to believe it or not, I think that the Supreme Court does pay attention to public opinion. I think it does matter. And I think that they were an instrumental part, they themselves, with many other families across the United States, stepping forward and saying, instead of hiding in the shadows, saying, we are a family too, and we deserve to have these rights. And they subjected themselves to a lot in terms of the time, the energy, the effort. And also, it's a scary thing to put yourself out there publicly like that. But they were champs, and they never said no to any of that stuff. And I think they understood their place in history, and they stepped up. But not for this, normally a lot of these groups, ECLU or Lambda Legal, or all these other groups, they spend so much time like selecting their plaintiffs, right? And making sure that they have people that will present best to the courts. And, we didn't do any of that. Just April and Jayne called me up one day, and I heard their story, and I was so moved by it. I just knew that they were the ones to really move the ball forward. And they were such champs. I can't believe that you guys said yes, first of all. And it was a very difficult 3.5 years or so. It was not easy on them. It was not easier on their families. But they did everything that was asked of them. And I think they were a big part of this win, as well as many other factors that coalesced at the same time. So they deserve a lot of credit for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess my question for it seems like a very organic story, which is really interesting, Dana, and how your case came about. During that 3.5 years, I guess my question for both of you, April and Jayne, is, did you ever feel like at any point, I can't do this? This is too much. Dana has got me in way over my head. Because she's right. It's one thing for Dana and I. We love doing television, right, Dana? But it's another thing to ask you guys who are trying to raise multiple kiddos with full-time, really, really hard jobs, to go out there and do this and be the lead plaintiffs in a case like this.
Were there times that we looked at each other and said, have we lost our minds? Of course. There were times like, what are we? But you go back home and you stare at those 3, 4, 5 tiny faces, and you're doing the right thing. Any parent, any mother is going to do anything that they can to protect their child. And that's all we were doing. I think at some point in time, they tried to change the idea of the court case. When they changed it to marriage, we were asked by some outside groups to focus on Jayne and I. And when we did that, it wasn't natural because this wasn't about Jayne and I. Jayne and I knew what we were getting ourselves into. we knew when we got married and had our commitment ceremony, we knew what we were looking into. I don't think when we started adopting kids that we realized what we were getting them into, and it wasn't fair. So we were going to do anything we could to make sure that they were safe.
Yeah, and I mean, just all of the hundreds of thousands of families now that have rights that they sort of take for granted, not knowing what it was like to live during a time period where they didn't have those rights. And again, it's only been 10 years. It's not like this is something that happened 50 years ago or 70 years ago or 100 years ago. But I think that the collective memory, especially for younger generations, of what it was like to not have the same rights as your neighbors, as all the other families that you know. I mean, I think that's been sort of lost in many ways because we did make a lot of progress very, very quickly. And I think it's only now that people are starting to appreciate that all of that can be taken away just as quickly as it came about in the first place.
Yes. We were asked a question as to how are we going to celebrate the 10-year anniversary, and the only thing I could think of was, I don't know that I can celebrate it. Yes, we're happy, we're here, but it just takes a moment for us to lose all of this, and how do you celebrate that?
That is a very sobering but very true point, April. And I certainly hope we don't have to be back in front of the Supreme Court on this issue. Dana behind her has a picture of herself arguing your case.
And there's you guys.
There you are, right?
Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
The case.
We all looked like 40 years younger, I think, at that time.
That's not my drawing, Dana.
No, during the course of the trial, Jayne is actually a very good artist. By the way, I have your drawings. Here's the funny part, of course, is that, who did we try this case against but the Department of Attorney General? And so all of our opposing counsel, all of those lawyers now work for me. And so Jayne, would sketch like hilarious little cartoons of them, which I, by the way, still have. I've never showed them to the people who work for me. But it is why, I mean, it's one of those things like talk about like ironies, right? The fact that then I was to succeed the Attorney General that fought us so hard on that case and came up with all kinds of horrifically creative arguments as to why, same-sex couples weren't good enough to get married, why we couldn't, why same-sex couples couldn't appreciate the sanctity of marriage, or why our children were destined to all go to prison, which was an actual argument that they made. And to know that by people like you and I serving in these roles, we can ensure that our state tax dollars are used to protect our state residents instead of to discriminate against them. And I think that's sort of an interesting point now too. And I always tell the story of downstairs in the lobby, right in front of my predecessor's portrait down there is a pride flag, which I'm sure if he ever comes back to the Department of Attorney General, he will really appreciate the placement of that particular flag.
Fall over.
But it matters having people in these critical offices that care about people's constitutional rights and want to make their lives better, not worse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it matters that we have folks like both of you who are willing to stand up for what's right, to stand up for your families, as April pointed out, because that's what this is about, and to stand up for fundamental rights. So thank you both for everything that you did for our country. You're both patriots as far as I'm concerned. And I am a little jealous because you got to hang out with Dana in a court case for 3.5 years.
Listen, I'm not going to.
We had some good times.
We had some good times.
We had some good times.
Boy, when they, first of all, when they use the phrase "don't make a federal case out of it," there's a reason for that. And,
Yep.
it really, you talk about this being a roller coaster. It truly was. But like I said, none of this would have happened. And none of it would have happened in the way it did if it not been for the courage of April and Jayne and their family. And, it was an unbelievable experience. And you guys were quite literally the perfect plaintiffs.
Thank you.
Here.
You're the only one who thinks so.
Yeah, I don't believe we'd hear that from anybody else but you guys. So
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
true. It's true.
thank you.
Well, thank you
Thank
both
you.
for joining us. We really appreciate you. Here's to Obergefell, the case that should have been called DeBoer.
That's right. And
Absolutely.
happy early anniversary to you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Thank
All
you.
Thanks for joining us. So this marks the end of our special 2-part Pride Month series here on Pantsuits and Lawsuits. We really appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, it has been great reminiscing with everyone about how far we've come in the last decade up until very recent months with regard to LGBTQ rights and protections.
Don't worry, there are plenty of other topics that we need to cover together, and we'll be back with another episode before you know it. And if you're curious about the other work that our departments are doing, please visit our websites. And of course, follow us here on social media.
Yeah, I mean, each and every day there's something new going on, and all that information, fortunately, is available to the public. We encourage you to check it out. And until next time, this has been A.G. Nessel
And A.G. Mays.
for Pantsuits and Lawsuits, signing off.
Hey, everybody, don't forget to catch Pantsuits and Lawsuits every other Friday, wherever you get your podcasts.